All right, we have Purdue head coach Tony Ersland with us. Thank you, Coach. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to talk, guys.
Um, Answer this for us, Coach. Things are obviously different with the current situation with everyone being quarantined and everything. So, what does like a typical day in the life for a college coach look like right now, since you can't really get out there and beat the streets?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of meetings. I mean, obviously communication is key with any group, right? So between communicating with my ADs, communicating with my team, how do you communicate with recruits? So a lot of it is having meetings where you're staying connected, as up to date as you can be, and then also, like you said, trying to build relationships, specifically with your team and maybe recruiting, because that's all we're allowed to do. No on campus, but off campus. You're just trying to kind of find ways to build relationships with those kids and stay connected in a way that's going to make you better when we do eventually get to go wrestle again. We're going to get a wrestle someday again here, and so we want to make sure that we're putting ourselves in a better position to hit the ground, both recruiting and just also from training, mentality, those kinds of things.
Yeah. How often are you trying to check in with your guys at this point?
Yeah, so we talk as a team, as an entire group once a week. We try to get on Zoom, or even if it's a conference call, and get together that way. But then I've broken my guys, the team, up into different groups, and so as assistant coaches and our volunteers, they all are calling them more often. It's a daily text or a call, just to make sure they're doing well on a couple fronts. I mean, obviously, like mentally, you want to make sure this isn't driving guys. Some guys get a little crazy being cooped up. You're so used to working out daily and what your routine is. So making sure like emotionally they're doing good, not taking that for granted. And then obviously there's school, and then even from a training perspective, just seeing how they're doing things and how they're trying to get better.
Yeah, you perfectly segued to what I wanted to ask. So, the general consensus of people I talk to, whether they be wrestling people or everyone else, is that we're about a month into this quarantine thing, and I feel like people are starting to hit the wall
Yeah.
mentally with this. So, since you can't coach your guys from a physical or technical standpoint right now, how do you coach up, especially because these are college kids, and they're kind of all over the place? How do you coach them and their mental health right now, I guess?
It's tough. It's not a one size fits all, but a lot of it is, I already touched on, is just communication, man. Making sure that your guys are doing okay. You let them do all the talking. The older I've gotten in terms of coaching, I've just learned to do a little less talking. When I was younger, I felt, man, I was juiced and I had all this knowledge, right? Wrestling knowledge you wanted to impart to these guys. You want to just fill them full of knowledge all the time. And as you get older, at least from my opinion, you let these guys do more talking, and they'll take you where they need to go. You know what I mean? They'll kind of tell you where they're struggling or what they want to work on or what their goals are. So I guess it's just being in touch with your guys and letting them talk. They'll take it where it needs to go, and you'll see if there's some warning signs, or maybe they're doing great. Maybe they've got into a great routine, and they're out running in the morning, they're doing their school at night, and they're maybe they're doing some journaling, writing down goals or something. So I do a lot of listening with the guys and try to hear what they need or where they want to go. We did 3 weeks just now too of one-on-one interviews. They were about one hour each, and obviously it was like, how'd your year go? This past year, from your thoughts. What was good, what was bad, and then let's talk about next year's goals, aspirations, and then what's the plan. And so honestly, it's a lot of hearing them talk, and then you can adjust or take them where they need to go off of that. So I'm a firm believer in listen to your guys, and then put a plan together for them. It's not always a one size fits all, and especially now I've got more time than ever, you know what I mean, to do those kinds of things. And excuse me. So that's where we're trying to be better.
All right, we'll switch gears here for a second. We like to ask some questions that maybe have a little bit different flavor for the coaches listening, because I think that everyone's heard the standard type interview questions. So you wrestled in college for Gable, correct?
Correct.
And everyone knows the reputation of Gable being, extremely intense and everything. What do you think it would look like for Gable coaching a college team now? Because kids are just a little different than they used to be.
Yep.
Culture's a little different. What would that look like?
Yeah, I still think it'd be awesome as a coach because it wasn't just X's and O's. He took, and if you've ever listened to him talk, he inevitably almost always goes here. It's finding out what the individual needs of the guys were. And if you look at his squads, obviously he was known for those absolute grinders that were super intense and just after you like a rabid dog. The Brands boys, you know what I mean? And the list would go on, right? Those competitors. But I mean, he coached guys like Ray Brins or Joe Williams, who were, if you're a bit of a historian, that were drastically different, and not only, maybe their mindset or personalities, but just even how they wanted to compete. And he found ways to motivate those guys and to make their style fit with his teams and what he was doing. So I still maintain that he would be a force to be reckoned with because he, work's still relevant, right? Like that's probably a part we all love about the sport. It's, you chose a tough sport and work really pays off. And he's going to work, he's going to work to find out what makes a kid tick, what technique maybe he needs to make adjustments in, motivate the guy. So I think he'd still be awesome in that way because you're not going to outwork him. And he was always based in what makes the individual guy tick and how can we motivate him.
I understand. Jesse, you got a question about roles?
So you going along with that and knowing that he was so good at getting to the individual, we were talking about, how you build a coaching staff and how you get the right guys in there to fill those different types of roles that you need to build a complete coaching staff. So we're just wondering, basically, what are the key roles that you think that your coaches need to be fulfilling, and how do you go about creating a well-rounded staff?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You start with, and it's kind of it's a coach, speak these days, but I truly believe it's the most important thing is you want to find guys who believe in the same things you do from a culture standpoint. Okay. I'm not saying necessarily a technical standpoint or even always a training aspect, but from a culture standpoint, you got to agree on how you're going to work day to day, what the lifestyle required. You need to understand and agree on those minimums as a staff. So I do like to find guys who are similar in, how we want guys to compete, how we want guys to train, those kind of aspects, how we want guys to live. But then after that, I really like to find guys who can add to the room in different ways that maybe I'm not as strong. And so, you take my background, obviously, I believe in, the discipline of being in great shape and scoring points and pressing the pace, hand fighting, positional things like that. Well, then I have a guy like AJ Shop who's just tremendous on top. Or even to go to Missouri, you got Daniel Lewis here now is my GA. And so what really appeals to me is, those guys are great workers and, they believe in the same core principles I do, but man, they approach the sport in a little different way. And I'm always intrigued, because you want to keep up. You don't want to get left behind. You want to keep up on a new technique or new ways to score and dominate. And so I really look at guys who can then add in ways that maybe I'm not as strong, from my background. So I'm looking for, personalities that match in terms of work ethic and culture, but then how can you bring something different to my staff? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So if you were, you're doing this every day right now on the recruiting trail, but just give us in general, I'll be honest, in Missouri, we don't always hear a lot about Purdue. So it's not a school that people have knowledge of, you know what I'm saying? So
sure.
when you're pitching to kids and telling people about Purdue, what's your pitch to them?
I go back again. You always want them to know like core philosophies, right? Like, 22 years, 23, I think now actually of doing this. And I've coached at a lot of schools and I've had kids commit for a lot of different reasons. The only way it works out as hard as you're going to work and as hard as you're going to push kids and what you demand of them is they have to believe this is a great fit for them. There's always workout partners and coaches and, the major of the school and things like that. But man, they've got to feel like, they're going to be supported in the right way. They're going to be happy there because they fit in. So I always try to, here's what our core, beliefs are. And then here's how we branch off. Here's our plan for you, how you fit in with what we're going to do, how we're going to train, and how we see you kind of contributing to the team and growing as an individual. So it always starts with making sure that they want what we believe, you know what I mean? And then how do they fit in, and building a plan for them. And that's part of that communication that we talked about, you know, is making sure that you're really communicating with them, because you don't want them to show up on campus and then it's nothing like they thought. You know what I mean? They, you know, then you got an unhappy kid and it just doesn't work out. So we really try to upfront, this is who we are, what we believe, where we're trying to go, right? From a goal standpoint, you know, we're in the Big Ten and we compete against, you know, Penn State, Iowa, Ohio State, you know, lots of great programs. And so, you know, I didn't come to Purdue to take a backseat to Penn State. And so this is our expectation. Don't come here if you're just looking for a comfortable place to, you know, get a great education and wrestle in the Big Ten. If you don't want to be challenged, if you don't expect or get excited to beat those guys, you know, wearing that singlet. You know, I know at Iowa, you know, there were some days where you won at the weigh-in. You know, you got on the scale and the teams just kind of took a back seat, and for good reason with the way, you know, those teams were. But you can't take a back seat to anybody in this sport. And so you want to make sure that you have kids who are excited about what you're about, where you're trying to go, and they embrace that, you know. And so that's where we really start with people, making sure they know exactly what it is and does this fit the mold of what you want.
Is there a program in the Big Ten you think that would be like a blueprint, I guess, for what you're trying to accomplish?
Well, I mean, listen, there's lots of great examples, right? There's lots of great examples. But I have, you know, my beliefs are, you know, some of it's Iowa, right? There's a huge imprint on me as a coach and as a competitor. But then, you know, I served under, you know, Tom Borelli at Central Michigan, that was my first job. I worked on my master's at Central Michigan coming out of Iowa, and we were great. You know, we fifth in the country with limited scholarships, 5 All-Americans. So I thought Tom was huge in the way, you know, that he managed and ran, you know, the business of college wrestling. You know, that had a huge imprint on me. You know, being at Nebraska, I was at Nebraska. So I know a lot about Missouri from recruiting there for 8 years. But, you know, being under Mark Manning and having Jordan Burroughs around and some great people like that. So you take pieces of all of these things, right? And you kind of use them to what fits you and your personality, because yes, you want to be a student of what other people are doing, but you always got to stay true to yourself. You don't want to ever get away from who you really are, because, you know, kids know it when they see a fake. You know, you can't do things or be someone you're not. So honestly, it's kind of a mix of these different coaches that I've been around in my career. And then certainly you look at the sport too. And so, you know, there's a guy, Cale Sanderson there. He's taken the sport to different places with his wrestling and coaching even. So yeah, you look at that and you try to see, you know, what do I like from that aspect of it? What are they doing? You know, and so you're watching, you're paying attention. And, you know, I use Penn State too, because, you know, Casey Cunningham, who's there, was actually a kid who won a national title at Central Michigan when I was there. He was the first national champion I was a part of. So, you know, picking Casey's brain or Cale's brain on occasion, you know, when we're talking, or, you know, just, you know, sitting around a table maybe, you're always paying attention. So I would hate to say it's just one thing. My roots, you know, coming from Iowa, being born and raised there, and watching the Hawks, you know, that's a major influence. But man, I've really taken a lot of bits and pieces, and will continue to do that. I wasn't the top guy, but man, the 4-point near fall, you know, so we've got, you know, Daniel Lewis, who can cradle you from everywhere. I got AJ Shop on the roll through tilt. So we're going to try to continue to evolve and go where we need to go to win.
That's it. You just made a good point. I never even thought about the fact that with the 4-point near fall, you should probably be changing and gearing your style. And you do have 2 guys really good for that. So,
yep.
All right. This is more just kind of like a fun question, if you will. But you have obviously coached around and coached a lot of really good wrestlers. Because, you know, like you were rehashing there, you coached Burroughs. You were at Northwestern and coached Jake Herbert, right?
Yep.
So
yep.
the NFL draft happened last night. Okay. Everyone wants to know who the number 1 pick is. So if you were building a program from scratch, just looking at their college careers, who would be your first round draft pick of the wrestlers you've been around?
Wow. That's that's a tough question. Man, a ton of great examples. You know who I really like, and I talk about him in the practice room too? It was a teammate of mine, actually, and I've just recently seen him doing some more interviews on track wrestling. Is Lincoln McElravy was a guy that I was, we were freshmen together and was on the team for 5 years at Iowa, who I had a lot of respect for. Super talented in the technical sense, right? But then had that mentality to keep coming after you as well. So and just when you talk to him too, I thought had a lot of great points, like mentally how he approached the sport, how you approach competing in different circumstances. He was a guy that I always respected a lot. Even though we were the same age, I always felt like he had a great take on the sport and training and competing and how to kind of keep it in the right perspective. So he would be somebody that would be at the very top of my list. You know what I mean? Certainly a guy like Burroughs, just because, to watch the evolution of Jordan, he came in as a true freshman when I was at Nebraska, and to watch his growth from a freshman where he was like 16-13, maybe, he's only 3 or 4 matches above 500. And then to watch the growth of him as a young man, and then into somebody who won the Hodge, and had great success world, but then had a huge, negative, at the Olympics again. And then how he kind of reinvented himself. There's somebody else who I really respect for how he's kind of grown and evolved in the sport. And I think his take is very fresh again for young people to see, and how you adversity in the sport. So those 2 guys would probably be at the top of my list, but there's a ton of guys I could go down the list that I really respect. But those are 2 guys that I really enjoyed, maybe their take mentally as much as what they did physically too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jesse, you wanna ask our final question we typically ask?
Yeah, so we just kind of ask everybody if they have a wrestling story. It could be weird, funny, just a good story that really sticks out to them, that they would like to share. Just something a little different.
Wow. Okay, I got one. It's pretty funny. These guys, yeah, I won't spill too much. These guys will still like me at the end of this, but it was funny. You know how competitive wrestlers are. And growing up in North Central Iowa, one of my roommates at Iowa was Mike Euchre. He was a couple-time All-American and was really, good under the lights. When it was time to be good, Mike, always rose to the occasion and got on the podium a couple times. And I lived with him for a number of years, so really enjoyed him. And then he had a buddy from Osage named Dusty Rhodes, so obviously that name, the American Dream, come to mind. But I just remember we were sitting around northwest Iowa at Lake Okoboji, and there was an argument about what was better, a couple-time national champ as Dusty was, as the D3 guy, or a couple-time All-American in D1. And of course, you know where it goes. You got to settle it on the mat. And these 2 guys were out wrestling, just off Lake Okoboji, on a summer night. And it was one of the funniest things I have ever seen. And I would leave it at that. But to watch 2 guys get fired up, in a time like this when we're all locked away, this was not a thing taken lightly. So these 2 guys got really charged up. They gave it everything they had out there, and I certainly won't say that we had a winner, but it went for a long time, and those of us that were present really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
So they didn't settle the debate, or you're not going to share the
Well, the guys were going off the end of the dock and into the water and back up on the land. It got really, the best aspects of the sport that we can think of. They're really competitive guys and just great dudes anyway to hang out with. But it was just really funny to watch these guys. They weren't going to give it up, and they were from the same hometown, same team. So I think it was cutting even deeper. It got a little crazy in a good way. Nobody got hurt, nothing wrong with it. But I just will always remember these 2 guys trying to settle the argument. What's better, a couple-time national champ in D3 or a couple-time All-American in D1? And then we're going to prove it right now. Like, this is going to settle it, So that was just from an off-the-wall story thing was pretty funny to me, and it'll always be with me.
That's awesome.
All right, Coach. I really do appreciate you talking to us. And you know, giving people something to watch while you're at home and like picking your brain. I really appreciate it. So thank you for agreeing
Yeah,
to
no,
do it.
always fun, guys. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk wrestling with you too, and then happy to do it down the road should we need to. But let's hope we all get back to our way of life shortly.
Absolutely.
You stay safe and have a good day. All right, Coach?
You as well, boys.